Ravanachaji Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jayo Vishnu Srimad His Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavadinda Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gaur Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Yesterday evening, we discussed Canto 1, Chapter 7, Verse 4, and it was suggested yesterday evening that the verses preceding that, the end of Chapter 6, where Narada is speaking to Vyas, they're also essence verses of the entire Srimad Bhagavatam. A little different, but interesting. I think we'll chant together 1.6.33. 1.6.33. And chant responsively. Pragayata svaviryani Pragayatak saviryani Tirtha pada priya Shrava Ahutva iva me shigram Darshanam yati chetasi Pragayatasva viryani Tirthapada priya shrava Ahuta iva me shigram Darshanam yati chetasi. So this is Narada speaking. I'll read the verse in the translation, the verse and the purport. Narada to Vyas. The Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, whose glories and activities are pleasing to hear, at once appears on the seat of my heart as if called for as soon as I begin to chant his holy activities. Purport. The absolute personality of Godhead is not different from his transcendental name, form, pastimes, and sound vibrations thereof. As soon as a pure devotee engages himself in the pure devotional service of hearing, chanting, and remembering the name, fame, and activities of the Lord, at once he becomes visible to the transcendental eyes of the pure devotee by reflecting himself on the mirror of the heart by spiritual television. Therefore, a pure devotee who is related with the Lord in loving transcendental service can experience the presence of the Lord at every moment. It is a natural psychology in every individual case that a person likes to hear and enjoy his personal glories enumerated by others, That is a natural instinct, and the Lord, being also an individual personality like others, is not an exception to this psychology, because psychological characteristics visible in the individual souls are but reflections of the same psychology in the absolute Lord. The only difference is that the Lord is the greatest personality of all and absolute in all his affairs. If, therefore, the Lord is attracted by the pure devotees' chanting of his glories, there is nothing astonishing. Since he is absolute, he can appear himself in the picture of his glorification, the two things being identical. Srila Narada chants the glorification of the Lord not for his personal benefit, but because the glorifications are identical with the Lord. Narada Muni penetrates into the presence of the Lord by the transcendental chanting. Now, before yesterday evening, I never thought of nor heard that these concluding verses of chapter 6 are essence verses of the whole Bhagavatam. They're certainly nice verses. But that's okay. We'll discuss this verse. In disciplic succession, Narada is the son and the disciple of Lord Brahma. So in our disciplic line, from Brahma to Narada to Vyas, then to Madhvacharya. Big gap of time between Vyas and Madhvacharya. It doesn't mean that there weren't students of, or disciples of, or followers of in disciplic succession from Vyas. For example, Shukadev was also his son and disciple in disciplic succession. But we don't find his name in the disciplic succession, although Narada is the son and disciple of Lord Brahma. And generally speaking, when lists of disciplic succession are made, it's principal personalities. It's not always like that. Different disciplic successions, they follow different procedures sometimes. The list that we have, my understanding is that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur firmly established the names and the members of our disciplic succession, and that it's the list of disciplic succession given by Bhaktisiddhanta is outstanding or principal personalities, meaning there are gaps of time between one in that list of disciplic succession and another in the list of disciplic succession where there's not a direct contact, without giving examples. But primary. Now, in this case, Vyasadeva, being a Chiranjiva, Madhva, according to the biographies of Madhva, that he actually had personal association. You could say physical association, but spiritual association, where he, Madhva, wanted to get verification of his understandings of Siddhanta, which he gathered by his own power because of who he is, or in the hierarchy of elevated personalities, he's an incarnation of Vayu, and so he had special abilities, and so he went to his spiritual master, or the person on earth, or at least in the higher realms of Badri. He went to come before Vyas to get verification and get teachings as well. verification of his teachings and further teachings and so on. So, in other words, Vyas is the spiritual master of Madhvacharya. Vyas was also the spiritual master of Shukadev Goswami and instructed Shukadev Goswami. We don't hear so much about the line of disciplic succession from Vyas to Shukadev Goswami. We certainly hear next in line, hearing from Shukadev Goswami, was Sutta Goswami. Shonaka Rishi heard from Sutta Goswami, but we don't hear much about that line. There may be some list somewhere that I'm unaware of, but the primary line that we hear, because this verse is Narada speaking to Vyas, it's that line. Narada speaking to Vyas, and then Vyas to Madhva, and then so on. In other words, there may be other lines emanating from Brahma to Narada to Vyas. There may be other lines of disciplic succession. But we emphasize our line of disciplic succession, unbroken line of disciplic succession. And it's important. And to help us understand our line of disciplic succession, Narada is speaking. So the compiler of this Srimad Bhagavatam is Vyas. He compiled this Bhagavatam, as we'll hear in the next chapter 7 of Canto 1. He compiled under the instruction of Narada to do so for the benefit of all, upliftment and benefit of all. And in a written form, that means it can benefit us even today because we don't have very good memories. So it was written down so we could hear and chant and remember by sound vibration. Then comes the topic in this verse and purport of the relevance of sound vibration, specifically the relevance of spiritual sound vibration, specifically the relevance of the name, form, qualities, and pastimes of the Supreme Lord, that type of sound vibration. And that type of sound vibration we're hearing in the purport is not different than the person, or abhinatvam namanamino. Abhina means non-different. Tvam, having the characteristic or quality of abhinatvam. The Bhagavatam is not different from the personality of Godhead, because the Srimad Bhagavatam is narrating topics about the personality of Godhead. What Narada is disclosing to Vyas leads into his instruction to compile Srimad Bhagavatam, and that message to Vyas is when I, Narada, engage in hearing and chanting the glories of the name, fame, qualities, and pastimes of the Supreme Lord, He, the Supreme Lord, appears in my heart. Question: is that figurative or is that literal? Answer: it's literal. Because let us try to understand what the form of the Lord, or visualizing the form of the Lord, seeing the form of the Lord. It's not with material eyes. It's with spiritual eyes. So now we go to the spiritual eyes question. What's spiritual eyes? Spiritual eyes, as we hear the description of spiritual form has spiritual eyes. Because spiritual form has spiritual eyes, the covering has material form, material eyes. But the covering is corresponding to the spiritual form. And because there's spiritual form, there's material form. So seeing the Supreme Lord in his heart does not mean with material vision. I'll say it again. Seeing the Supreme Lord within one's heart does not mean material vision. like, open heart surgery, and you look inside, and there's the Supreme Lord. And without having open heart surgery, Narada can see the form of the Supreme Lord within his heart. It's a spiritual vision. It's a spiritual experience. It's a spiritual process. And so, because of those adjectives, spiritual, 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 the conclusion is also spiritual. Seeing the form of the Lord within the heart is not equivalent to seeing with material eyes. If it's not equivalent to, then what is it? It's a spiritual seeing. Going back to the definition that the form of the Lord is all spiritual, we, being parts and parcels of the Supreme, who is all spiritual, we're also spiritual. So one can say, within the spiritual mind, within the spiritual heart, which is different than the material mind and the material heart. So it's the spiritual mind and the spiritual heart. So Narada is capable. He's not a sadhaka. We're sadhakas. We practice and practice and practice, and we experience whatever we experience, or don't experience whatever we don't experience. But Narada is informing Vyas, who's feeling despondent, that here's the process. And back to the kind of the essence of why Narada is expressing that Vyasa is feeling despondent is because he didn't sufficiently glorify directly the personality of Godhead. In other words, the Vedas do not in all circumstances directly glorify the personality of Godhead. The Vedas, in many cases, they glorify indirectly the personality of Godhead by describing, for example, by describing the demigods, and this demigod, that demigod, what they do, and so forth and so on. They're of the Supreme Lord, the representatives of the Supreme Lord, but standing alone without their clear, explicit connection with the personality of Godhead, one may get a different idea than their connection to the personality of Godhead. Another example, Varnashram. It's a topic that's discussed in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So, Varnashram can be viewed on the material and physical plane. These 4 orders and 4 ashrams, they're on the physical material plane. Is there connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead? Well, depends. It depends on the consciousness of the performer and the hearer. About the hearer, about Varnashram, the one who's living the life of Varnashram, one can be, like, for example, Vyas. He's a Brahmana. He's a Grahastha. So he was living the life of a Brahmana, Grahastha, Varna and Ashram. But he's not a Varnashrami. But he's teaching it for the upliftment of society. The purpose of it is that Krishna becomes revealed. So, one more time, that's an example of the principle. The principle is Varnashram transcendental, or is it simply in the direction of transcendental? And the answer is depends on the consciousness of the speaker and the listener and the performer. Let's go to Vrindavan. Nanda Maharaj is an eternal associate of Krishna as father. Did he observe the duties of a person who's engaged in a Vaishya profession? Yes, he engaged in the duties of one who's in the Vaishya profession. So is there varnashram in the spiritual plane? Yes. But it's not simply regulation, it's a description of the different aspects of those who serve Krishna, and they serve Krishna according to the codes of the Vedas, but it doesn't stay on codes of the Vedas platform. It's a transcendental manifestation of that which may have its superimposition upon material activities. So Narada, one can say, he is a eternal renunciate. So he's a Naishtika brahmachari. He's a perfected soul that is not in the grahastha ashram. Whether you want to say he's in the sannyas ashram or brahmachari ashram, he's in the renounced ashram. And that's on the physical plane, that's a certain part of the varnashram system. Is he a varnashrami? No. He's a transcendentalist. So as a transcendentalist, for example, he can be a matchmaker for marriage. How did Rukmini come to know about Krishna? When her brother wanted her to marry Shishupal, she heard about Krishna from Narada. And she gave her heart to Krishna because of hearing about Krishna from Narada, etc. So he's a transcendentalist. Narada speaking this verse, he's a transcendentalist. And as a transcendentalist, we'll go back to the verse now. He at once appears on the seat of my heart. Seat of my heart doesn't mean the physical muscle that pumps blood. It's the seat of consciousness. He appears in the seat of my heart because the soul is in the region of the physical heart, but so it's both literal and metaphorical or poetic. The seat of my heart is his consciousness. The Supreme Lord appears within his consciousness. As soon as I begin to chant his holy activities. So we're not advanced like that, but the principle applies. That is, the awakening of our Krishna consciousness compared to the mature stage of Narada, who is at the mature stage of Krishna consciousness. The Lord appears on the seat of Narada's heart, or the seat of consciousness, the place of consciousness. So that comes this nice teaching, which we would like to have a direct experience of, but the name and the form and the qualities and the pastimes are all absolute. And so by doing any one of those things, like something that we can do, the sadhana practice of hearing and chanting, so Narada's not a sadhaka, he's a perfected soul. So as soon as does that mean that there's some times that he's not? As soon as I glorify, chant his holy activities. So sometimes he's doing services that aren't explicitly chanting his glories, but they're connected to the transcendence, the nature of Krishna's transcendence. That's Narada. And the followers of Srimad Bhagavatam want to become like Narada or Narada-like. And Vyasadeva-like, and Shukadev Goswami-like, and Maharaj Parikshit-like, and so forth and so on. we can become little reflections of the quality and character of these elevated souls. The principle is the process of hearing. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam. And that Vishnu Smaranam, explicitly, Narada is stating, the Lord appears in the seat of my heart. Very attractive process. I won't be here for tomorrow morning's class, but those of you who are here and those who are listening, you can read on because the rest of the chapter is only a few more verses to get the picture of Narada's instructions to Vyas that led to Vyas doing what Vyas did, which I'll carry on in the next place. It's verse 5 of chapter 7. He, the receiver of Narada's association, got an instruction how to achieve spiritual perfection. And the description of his experience of spiritual perfection is in those verses. It's very nice. There are extensive commentaries on those verses by our acharyas because they're so important, essence verses. Let's see if there's some discussion on this morning's text. Narada's instructions to Vyas, end of chapter 6.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Guru Maharaj, I'm trying to understand how this verse makes it as an essence of...
You have to ask the person who made that statement yesterday.
Because I'm comparing this with the Chatur Shloki verses.
Yes,
in the
and
second
they don't
canto.
compare. I agree with you. I don't disagree with you. It is in essence, in this sense, it's describing the process, the sadhana and sadhya. But many verses in the Bhagavatam are describing sadhana and sadhya, and how do we say they're essence verses? It's describing sadhana and sadhya. Well, you can ask the devotee that made this statement. It's just a nice verse.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
He wants to give you the microphone back. Anything online? Okay. Okay, we'll end there. Srila Prabhupada ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, or Premanandi.